Hello everyone and welcome to Ticker.com's news channel on YouTube. On this channel, we review stock markets, discuss financial news, market trends, and economic data from Wall Street to Global Street. So let's dive in. The Federal Reserve lifted its Fed funds rate range by 25 basis points to between 5.25% and 5.5%, taking the rates to the highest level since January 2001. The Fed's move was widely anticipated, and rates rose for the 11th time since March 2022. The Fed funds rates are interest rates for transactions between banks, but higher rates filter down to other rates charged by banks to consumers and businesses. Often higher rates are immediately increased for borrowers, but banks are slow in paying higher interest rates to depositors, thereby widening net interest margins in their benefit. Fed's credibility is also on line because despite the sharp decline in overall inflation to near 5% from as high as 9%, core inflation has stayed near 5% after 11 rate hikes over the last 16 months. The U.S. economy expanded at 2.4% annual pace in the second quarter, faster than 2% in the first quarter, the Bureau of Economic Analysis reported Thursday. The worries of economic recession were set aside after GDP expanded for the third quarter in a row after shrinking for 2 quarters in a row in 2022. The growth accelerated after non-residential fixed investment expanded, but consumer spending slowed sharply. In other economic news, durable goods orders rose 4.7% in June from the previous month, the fastest pace of increase since July 2020, the U.S. Census Bureau reported Thursday. New orders for durable goods for May were revised higher to an increase of 2%. Orders rose for the 4th month in a row, and transportation orders soared 12.1% after non-defense aircraft and parts orders jumped 69.4%. Orders excluding transportation rose 0.6%, and excluding defense jumped 6.2%. The Fed's preferred measure of inflation slowed in June, confirming the cooling inflation trend in place for the last 9 months. The Personal Consumption Expenditure Price Index rose 3% in June, the slowest pace in about 2 years. The core PCE price index, which excludes food and energy, slowed to 4.1% in June, the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis reported Friday. The alternative gauge of inflation measures inflation for longer-term trends, but also understates inflation experienced by most households in urban areas. On a monthly basis, the PCE price index and core PCE price index rose at a slower pace of 0.2%. Let us review economic data in Europe. The European Central Bank hiked rates for the 9th time in a row on Thursday. The ECB raised by 25 basis points for its main refinancing operations to 4.25%, the highest rate since October 2008, and deposit facility rate to 3.75%, and marginal lending facility rate to 4.5%. The rates will be effective from August 2nd. The central bank has tightened rates by 425 basis points since July 2022, the fastest pace of rate increase in its history. But the central bank has cautioned in the statement and said inflation is expected to remain too high for too long. In other economic news, the German economy stalled in the second quarter, the French economy rose more than expected, and the Spanish economy slowed. The latest data from statistical agencies showed Germany's economy stalled in the second quarter after declining 0.1% in the first quarter and falling 0.4% in the final quarter of 2022, the Federal Statistics Office reported Friday. The French economy expanded at a faster pace of 0.5% in the second quarter from the downwardly revised 0.1% increase in the first quarter, the statistical agency INSEE said in a report on Friday. Improving international trade balance supported the growth despite the weaker domestic consumption and nearly flat gross fixed capital formation. France's consumer price inflation slowed to 4.3% in July from 4.5% in June, and inflation was the weakest since February 2021, when prices rose at 3.6%. Spain's GDP slowed in the second quarter to 0.4% from a year ago, the statistical agency INE noted in its economic update. Swedish GDP contracted more than expected in the second quarter after rebounding in the previous quarter, Statistics Sweden noted in their report on Friday. GDP contracted 1.5% on a sequential basis and dropped 2.4% from a year ago, and several factors negatively impacted economic growth, including weakening exports in June and falling retail sales in the quarter. Spain's jobless rate fell to 11.6% in the second quarter from 13.3% in the previous quarter, the lowest since 2008, the National Statistics Institute INE reported Thursday. The jobless rate in the second quarter was 12.5%. Turning our attention to Asia, Japan's 10-year government bond yield crossed 0.5% on Friday, hitting its highest level in 9 years after the Bank of Japan maintained its policy of ultra-loose interest rate but changed its language to make its yield curve control policy more flexible. The BOJ kept its short-term interest rate target at negative 0.1% and that for the 10-year government bond yield around 0% during its July meeting. The central bank also maintained guidance allowing the 10-year yield to move 0.5% in either direction, but stated that those would be references rather than rigid limits. The population of Japanese nationals fell 801,000 in 2022 from a year earlier to 122.4 million, marking the largest drop and the first time all 47 prefectures have seen a decline since the survey began in 1968, government data showed Wednesday. As of January 1 of this year, Japan's population, including foreign residents, stood at 125.4 million, down around 500,000 from a year ago, according to a demographic survey by the Ministry of Internal Affairs and Communications. China's personal mortgage loans shrank in the second quarter from a year ago, marking the first quarterly decline since central bank records began in 2004. Home buyers have been taking fewer loans since the first quarter of 2022, as China's zero-COVID restrictions restricted property sales, denting demand for borrowing. Let us now shift our attention to stock markets around the world. The IMF raised its 2023 global growth estimate to 3%, up from 2.8% in its April assessment. The IMF revised higher estimates for the US and India by 0.2 percentage points to 1.8% and 6% respectively, an estimated growth rate of 5.2% for China. The Dow Jones Industrial Average halted its 13-day rally and came close to breaking its record 126 years ago. The Nasdaq Composite and the Nikkei led world markets in the year so far. Earnings release dominated news flow this week, with the energy sector struggling. Technology, communication services, and consumer durable sectors are leading the 9-month rally in the U.S. stocks. Large-cap growth stocks are leading other stock groups. Of the 9 leading country indices in the world, only the Hang Seng Index in Hong Kong is down in the year so far. Banks in India are reporting strong earnings growth in the June quarter. The luxury stocks and banks are outperforming market indices in Europe. Let us focus now on individual stocks. About 700 companies reported earnings in the US this week and at least 400 companies in Europe. General Electric jumped after the company reported a rise in its aviation business. Microsoft reported solid earnings, but cloud computing segment revenue growth eased slightly. Alphabet, the parent of Google, reported a rise in earnings and sales driven by cloud services demand. Meta, the parent of Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, said advertising revenue rose and cost-cutting helped to improve earnings. Chipotle Mexican Grill reported healthy sales and same-store sales in its latest quarter. Boeing reported strong backlog and increased its aircraft delivery in the quarter. LVMH, the maker of Louis Vuitton bags, said sales growth in the U.S. eased on macroeconomic headwinds. Volkswagen lowered its outlook, but Mercedes-Benz lifted its views for the year. BNP Paribas said it plans to resume stock repurchases from the next month. MTU Aero Engines said free cash flow may decline on higher inspection costs. 3M agreed to pay $12.5 billion over a decade to public water systems around the U.S. for damages related to forever chemicals. Royal Caribbean said bookings are running ahead of the pre-COVID levels at record prices. Union Pacific announced the appointment of a new chief executive and made changes to its board of directors. Looking ahead on the economic front in the U.S., investors will be reviewing jobs and earnings from Starbucks, Caterpillar, AMD, and Pfizer, among other companies. In Europe, investors are looking ahead to second quarter GDP from the Eurozone and Italy and the Bank of England's policy decisions. That's all we have. We will see you next week.